The marble floors of the Gallery Lumiere didn't just reflect light, they reflected power. To walk on them, you needed a ticket that cost more than most people's cars. To stand on them, you needed a name that echoed through history. Or, in Sophie Lawrence's case, you needed a mop. Sophie moved along the edge of the room, invisible in her gray uniform. She was a ghost in a machine that ran on ego. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound, unlike the sharp clicks of the Louboutins and the Oxford brogues that paraded past her. She stopped near a display case. Inside rested the centerpiece of tonight's auction, the Winter Rose, a masterpiece by a forgotten impressionist. "Excuse me," a sharp voice cut through the air. Sophie didn't flinch. She turned slowly. It was Camille Durand, the gallery's chief curator. Camille looked at Sophie not as a person, but as an obstacle in the visual landscape. The smudge on the glass, Camille said, pointing a manicured finger. "It's catching the light. Fix it. Now." Sophie nodded, pulling a claw from her cart. She reached for the glass case, but her eyes lingered on the painting inside. She knew the brushwork. She knew the specific way the light hit the petals. She knew it because she had grown up eating breakfast in front of it. "Careful," Camille snapped. "Don't breathe on the frame. It's worth more than your life." Sophie wiped the glass. "The frame is wrong for this period," Sophie said quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper. Camille froze. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "Excuse me?" Sophie kept her eyes on the glass. "The painting is from 1890. The frame is a reproduction from the 1920s. It disrupts the aesthetic integrity." Camille stepped closer, invading Sophie's space. You are the cleaner. You do not speak about aesthetics. You clean. Do you understand?" "I was just saying." "You were just saying nothing," Camille hissed. "You are invisible here. Remember that. If you enjoy stories where the underdog finally gets justice, make sure to hit that like button. It helps the algorithm find the people who need to see this story the most." Just then, the heavy oak door swung open and the room shifted. The energy dipped and rose like a tide. Julian Moreau had arrived, the owner of the gallery, the king of this castle. He wore a suit that was likely tailored that morning. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, radiating the charisma of a man who had never been told no in his life. He approached the display case, flanked by two investors. "The Winter Rose," Julian announced, his voice booming pleasantly. "The jewel of the auction, estimated at $15 million. A tragic history, of course, taken from a family that couldn't afford to keep it. But we have given it a proper home." Sophie stiffened. "Taken." That was one word for it. She pushed her cart closer, pretending to adjust a velvet rope. She had to tell him. If the frame was wrong, the valuation could be challenged. It was a small detail, but in the art world, details were everything. And despite everything, Sophie loved the art more than she hated the people. "Mr. Moreau," she said. Julian didn't hear her. He was too busy basking in the admiration of the investors. "Mr. Moreau," she said again, louder this time. A hush fell over the immediate circle. People turned. Julian stopped mid-sentence and looked down. He didn't see a woman. He saw a uniform. "Is there a spill?" Julian asked, his voice laced with amusement. "Did someone knock over a champagne flute?" "No, sir," Sophie said, her hands clasped in front of her. "It's about the painting, the frame." Camille stepped in front of her, smiling tightly. "Julian, the staff is getting excited. It'll handle it." Julian waved a hand dismissively. "Let her speak. I'm curious. What does the floor staff know about Impressionism?" A few guests chuckled. Sophie felt the heat rise in her chest, but she held her ground. "The frame is a forgery," Sophie said clearly, "and the painting, the provenance listed in the catalog, is incomplete. The original owner's signature is on the back of the canvas, not the sale deed." The silence that followed was thick. Julian stared at her. Then he laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was a cruel one. Julian said, looking around at his guests. "We have an art historian in the cleaning crew. Tell me, did you learn that in janitorial school?" The crowd laughed. Sophie's jaw tightened. "I know it because my grandfather painted it." Sophie said. The laughter died instantly. Julian's smile vanished. He stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble. He loomed over her. Your grandfather, Julian said softly, was a bankrupt drunk who sold his legacy for pennies. And you are embarrassing my guests. He reached over to the display case, right next to Sophie's face. He tapped the glass. This is my gallery. These are my paintings. You are a janitor. You are dirt on my floor, Julian whispered, his voice carrying in the silent room. Camille, get this woman out of here. Fire her. Remove her. Immediately, Camille said, grabbing Sophie's arm. Sophie didn't resist. She let them pull her toward the service exit. But as she was dragged away, she locked eyes with Julian. You don't own the signature, Sophie said. And without the signature, you own nothing. Julian scoffed and turned his back on her. The cold Paris air hit Sophie like a slap. The service door slammed shut behind her. She stood in the alleyway, the smell of garbage replacing the smell of expensive perfume. She took a deep breath. She didn't cry. She had cried enough in the last 10 years. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, battered leather keyring. It held a single, heavy brass key. 10 years ago, before the lawyers, before the debt collectors, before the fall, her grandfather had taken her to the bank. He had placed this key in her hand. The world will try to take what is ours, Sophie, he had said, his voice trembling with age. They value the price, not the soul. If they ever come for the soul, this is how you fight back. Inside the safety deposit box at the Banque de France lay the one thing Julian Moreau had missed, the ledger transfer. In the rush to liquidate the Laurent assets, the lawyers had overlooked a crucial clause in the family trust. The art was not property. It was a loan to the gallery, renewable only by the signature of the heir. Sophie looked at her watch. The auction started in 40 minutes. She walked away from the alley. She didn't look like a janitor anymore. She walked like a woman with a mission. Inside the gallery, the lights dimmed. The auction was beginning. Julian stood at the podium, looking dapper and in control. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian announced, tonight we make history. Lot number 1. He went through the items. A sculpture, a sketch. The bidding was furious. Millions were exchanged in seconds. Sophie was forgotten, a stain removed. But Julian had made a mistake. He had humiliated her in front of witnesses. He had shown his true face to face a man who believed his status made him right. Sophie walked into the Banque de France. The guards recognized her, the quiet woman who came once a month. But today, she walked with speed. She opened the vault. She pulled a drawer. There, wrapped in velvet, was a document. It was stamped and signed by her grandfather. It stated clearly the Laurent collection is held in trust. Transfer of ownership requires a counter-signature of the designated heir. Sophie picked up a pen from her pocket. She didn't sign it. Not yet. She took the document, placed it in a waterproof folder, and hailed a taxi. To the Galerie Lumiere, she said, we are approaching the turning point. If you want to see the moment the trap snaps shut, stay tuned. And subscribe if you believe that truth always wins. Back at the gallery, Julian was sweating, not because of the auction was going perfectly, but because of a whisper. Camille had leaned in. The cleaner, Camille whispered. She said she was a Laurent. A delusion, Julian dismissed, sweating slightly. But what if she has the papers? Camille asked. The lawyer said the transfer was messy. Julian gripped the podium. She is a janitor. She has nothing. We proceed. He banged the gavel. And now, the piece de resistance. The winter rose. The painting was wheeled out on a dais. The crowd gasped. It was beautiful. We start the bidding at 10 million euros, Julian announced. 12. A voice called. 15. The numbers climbed. 20 million. 25. Julian was beaming. This would save the gallery for the year. This would secure his legacy. 30 million. A voice boomed from the back. The crowd turned. The doors had opened. Sophie walked in. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She had changed into a simple black dress she kept in her locker at the bus station. It was modest, but she wore like armor. Beside her walked a man in a sharp suit marked Vidal, a lawyer she had called from the bank. A friend of her grandfather's. 30 million, Sophie repeated, her voice clear. Julian stared at her. You were fired. Security. 2 guards stepped forward, but Mark Vidal held up a hand. Touch her, and I will have his establishment closed for assault before the gavel falls. We are here to bid. Julian laughed nervously. You have no money. You are bluffing. I have the asset, Sophie said, walking down the center aisle. The crowd parted for her. The painting is the asset, but the ownership is mine. I own this painting. Julian shouted. I have the bill of sale. You have a bill of temporary custody? Sophie corrected. She stopped at the front row. The Loron Trust never signed the transfer. My grandfather's signature is on a consignment agreement. It requires my countess' signature for any sale. Julian looked at Camille. Camille was pale, clutching her clipboard. Show me, Julian snarled. Sophie nodded to Mark. He placed the document on the podium. Julian snatched it up. He scanned the paper. His face went white. The signature was there. The stamp was there. The legal language was binding. This is outdated, Julian stammered. It's a forgery. It is notarized by the same notary you used for your last property purchase. Sophie said calmly, Shall we call him? The room was deadly silent. The investors were watching. The media was watching. Julian looked at the crowd. He needed to regain control. This is absurd, Julian yelled. She is a disgruntled employee. Security, remove them. The auction continues. He raised the gavel to strike. I wouldn't do that, Sophie said. Her voice cut through the air like glass. Selling property you do not own is fraud, Julian. The penalty is 10 years in prison, plus the forfeiture of all gallery assets. Julian froze. The gavel hovered in the air. If you bang that gavel, Sophie said, you are confessing to the crime. If you stop the auction, you admit I am right. Julian looked at the bidders. They were retracting their paddles. The trust in the room had evaporated. 30 million, Sophie said. I am the owner. I am buying my own family's legacy back. But considering the handling fees and emotional distress, I think the price should be adjusted. You can't, Julian whispered. I can, Sophie said. Or I can let the police investigate the paperwork. Camille? Camille flinched. She looked at Julian, then at Sophie. The acquisition file, Camille said softly. It was rushed. I told you, Julian. Julian's shoulders dropped. He looked defeated. Sophie stepped up to the podium. She took the gavel from Julian's limp hand. The auction is closed, Sophie announced. This painting is not for sale. It is returning home. The aftermath was chaos. Reporters swarmed Sophie. The investors demanded their deposits back. Julian sat on the steps of the stage, his head in his hands. His empire was crumbling. Sophie directed the movers to carefully take the painting. As she walked out, carrying her family's legacy, she passed Julian. Why? He asked, looking up. Why work here? Why not just sue me? Sophie stopped. She looked at him, really looked at him. I needed to know if the art was safe. She said, I needed to see if you loved it, or if you just loved the money. Tonight, I got my answer. She walked out into the Paris night. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She wasn't a janitor anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a Loron. Justice isn't always about destroying your enemy. Sometimes, it's just about taking back what was always yours. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We tell these stories because dignity should never be underestimated. What would you have done in Sophie's shoes? Let me know in the comments.